welcome. I'm James Coplien, and I'm coming to you from Denmark via Zoom. I'm going to put up my slides here. People seem to like slides with these, so we'll do it that way. If you look at the chat, you'll see that I have posted a place where you can put your questions. So if you have questions that come up as we're going along, you can write your questions there, and then there's a voting system that you can use to vote on questions that you would like to see answered. And you can put a question there at any time, and then I will answer them when I get to them. I mean, including in the middle of the talk, if people find that it's important to have something clarified in the middle of the talk. But let me get right into the material here. Most of you who signed up for this took the little quiz. The reason I asked you to take the quiz is to help make a point behind these patterns. And that is one of the reasons we're doing these patterns is because there is just a lot of misinformation out there about Scrum. And even though people are certified, or even though they've been to a course, or even though they have read the books, people don't understand the very, very, very basic things about Scrum. So this exam was, I mean, these are really basic things. Now I can go up 3 or 4 levels of sophistication, but these are basic things. Basically, given the scores on this exam, no one who took the exam should be practicing as a Scrum Master. The knowledge of Scrum is low enough that, I mean, on the basic stuff. And so here's what the distribution of scores were. So the average score was 45%. So 3.6 questions right out of 8. I'm very briefly going to go through the questions. I won't go into a full explanation, but I want to develop an appreciation that what we believe about Scrum is very, very often wrong. So what's the goal of the daily Scrum? Well, most of you did pretty well on this. You said to replan the work until the next daily Scrum. So great, 68% of you got this right. So far, you have a score of 68%. The next question is, what is the order of the product backlog? Is it unordered, delivery order, priority order? And you all said priority order. What is the order of the product backlog? It is in delivery order. If you turn it sideways, it's a calendar. It's not priority order. Who's priority? Customer A, customer B, the team, the product owner, marketing, sales, management? No, the product owner takes everybody's priority and puts all this information together into a delivery plan for delivering product increments. And so it's in delivery order. Oh, your score went down to 36%. What else what is the product backlog? And most of you got this right. It's a list of descriptions of product features and deliverables. So great. I mean, your score goes back up to 39%. The product backlog is a roadmap. True or false? You almost were evenly split on this, but the slight majority got this right. It is not a roadmap. A roadmap has alternatives and decision points that you will evaluate in the future and decide whether to go down branch A or branch B. The product roadmap is a linear list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There is no branching. It is ordered. What is the sprint review? Again, most of you got this right. A few of you said it's a demo. No, the demo is a very small part of the sprint review. This is a discussion of past releases, of customer experiences, of technical debt, of bugs, of what we've learned about the architecture, anything about the product. And so it's a meeting with a wide range of discussions about things. And you're adding new things to the product backlog as you discover new things about the product. What is the best relationship between the product owner and the development team? Most of you got this right. The product and the developers define this together But the product owner has the final authority. The product owner has veto power. About what percentage of its sprints should a great Scrum team fail, where fail is defined as not completing everything on the sprint backlog? And I gave you 4 choices. What percentage of your sprints should you fail? 50%. If you are not failing 50% of your sprints, you're lying, you're cheating, you're cooking the books. An excellent Scrum team should fail 50% of its sprints. Now this one I want to explain a little bit. I think you all kind of understand velocity. So here's a burn down chart. And so on the y-axis, we have gummy bears or estimation points about the number of effort remaining. This team's velocity is on the average about 235. And then we can see that there's a range. The velocity isn't exactly 235. It's 235 plus or minus 20%, because it's a stochastic number. Scrum is a complex system, and so it has variance. So on the average, your velocity is 235, and that's what you use to pull things into the sprint. Well, if your velocity has a variance and you plan on the average, well, half of the sprints will finish earlier than that planned amount, and they will actually deliver more. You have to go down the product backlog, break down more for product backlog increments, and keep going. And half of them will deliver less. So what percentage of your sprints do not deliver everything on the sprint backlog? 50%. It's just simple math. Now, the same is true in project management. This has nothing to do with Scrum. It's just in project management, we lie about it. We say we deliver everything. So in Scrum, we're transparent. You will fail 50% of your sprints. And you as a Scrum Master, it's your job to educate your managers and your team and your customers that 50% of the time, they will not get all of the PBIs on the sprint backlog. Now, what do you do about this? You decrease variance. All of Scrum is about decreasing variance. So you want to shrink that variance from 20% to 10%. Now, what percentage of your sprints fail? Well, 50%. You can't change that 50%, but the leakage is not half of what it used to be. So this is Scrum basics. This is Agile basics. And it looks like nobody out there knows that. What's the value of certification? Surveys among project managers reflect exactly what you said, that it does not make any difference. Certification, I feel, it almost borders on a fraud. I think education is good, training is good, experience is the best educator, but we know that the certification really doesn't portend for much. I mean, the majority of the people who took this test were certified, and you have an average of less than 45%. So we started noticing this about 10 years ago. People just do not understand Scrum. And the Scrum guide is a mess. It has conflicts, it's contradictory, it's ambiguous, it's vague, and it gets worse with every release. So I wanted to make a very authoritative guide to what Scrum is from the experts that is really in the spirit of doing Scrum. So this is what Scrum Patterns are. And we're going to be talking about Scrum Patterns today that are in a book called A Scrum Book, The Spirit of the Game. I like patterns because you get to pick the ones you feel will be applicable to you. You know better than some Scrum trainer or some Scrum coach does about what's going to help you out. So it's not a matter of just going down the checklist and checking off all the principles of Scrum until you get to 100%, but rather picking the parts of Scrum that are going to help you do what you need to do. There are no Scrum police. There's no points for doing all of Scrum. The points are for delivering value to your end user. It's piecemeal rather than all at once. So you can deliver Scrum a little at a time to your development team, rather than just turning on Scrum and trying to do too much at a time. It's about authoritative, research-based, empirically based patterns. So we're only going to put something in the pattern book if it really has been proven already. And last, we want to raise the bar, both for patterns and for Scrum, to be able to say this really is about Kaizen. This is about excellence. It's not just about sucking a little less. So if you're doing Scrum right, you're not getting 10 or 20%. You're getting 100%. You're getting 1,000%. This is what we're seeing from teams in the Ukraine. This is what we're seeing from teams in the Netherlands. So, I mean, if you want to just get 10 or 20%, just, change the color of lights in the room or something like that. So we're in this to do something great rather than just do a little at a time. And we're documenting these as patterns. I'm going to say just a couple of words about what a pattern is. I mean, real patterns. Patterns come from an architect named Christopher Alexander. And he used them to describe how to build buildings. And a bunch of people got together and started using these for describing object-oriented programming, and they called them design patterns. And probably a lot of you have the book called Design Patterns. And I told them at the time, I said, guys, these aren't patterns. And they said, well, but yes, the book is selling very well. And it wasn't until several years later that I got this mail from Richard Helm, where Richard Helm discovered, oh gosh, the things in the Gang of Four book aren't patterns. They're something. They're little hacks. They're little microarchitectures. So Richard Helm understood it. So did Eric Gamma. Eric and I had this Twitter exchange back in 2016. I still don't know if Ralph Johnson understands it, and I think John Vosides went to his grave not understanding what patterns are. What a pattern is a moral imperative. It comes out of community. It is empirically grounded. That is, we know it works. Scientifically, we know it works. We can either prove it or we have a volume of data that say it works. It has some element of beauty, of humanness to it. So it's not just a technical thing. And it's about building something. So we're going to be building an organization, and we're going to be building a value stream. It's not just a process. That's this ISO 9000 stuff. Process is far too shallow. If you change the process without changing the structure is more powerful, and the power of the structure will win if you try to do process improvement. Scrum is a structure changing framework, not a process framework. It changes your organization and it changes the structure of your value stream. That in turn will cause the right processes to happen. And so we want to make this change at a structural level. Here's an example of a pattern. This is from Ward Cunningham, the guy who invented the web. And he has created this pattern for publishing documents on the web. So you have multi-column documents. And this pattern has several parts. There's a title. You notice the title is in small caps. We usually have pattern titles in small caps. Then there's a part called the context and the forces. And he says, when you're reading, your eye moves from left to right, but when you get to the right end of a line, your eyes have to refocus on the beginning of the next line, and that actually takes some muscle effort and some mental effort. The longer the line is, the harder that is to do. And you can waste several searches, or what are called fixes, in trying to identify the beginning of the next line if the line is too long. Therefore, compose text into lines averaging 10 words or less for casual reading, or even narrower for speed reading. So this is a pattern. Now, it's one of maybe 50 or 100 patterns that you have to glue together to make a web page for reading text. So it's no pattern in itself is going to make things better. Patterns always work with other patterns. And the collection of patterns that together make quality or move the system ahead is called a pattern language. Now we have 2 pattern languages in the book, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. But I wanted to first get this notion in your mind about what a pattern is. It's not an algorithm. It's not a recipe. It's something that is timeless, that's proven, that's structural. And once you see it, it's obvious. So it isn't some obscure technical thing. It's, once I describe this pattern to you, of course you understand how it works, but maybe you would never have thought of doing this yourself. So these are just kind of laws of nature. And what we've been doing is looking for the laws of nature of Scrum. You probably all know about pair programming. That's a pattern, but what are we building? We're building an organization, which is a pair of programmers. Now, this pattern was first documented in another book, and Shrikant mentioned it, the Organizational Patterns book, which came out in about, I think, 2004 or something like that. And basically the pattern says software development is mistake prone, but reviews alone are not enough. Therefore, allow, but don't force people to work in pairs. And they're going to look at each other's code in real time, and that's going to get rid of problems. So this is a pattern. It's a new thing, right? It came out of extreme programming, right? Kent Beck invented it, right? So we all think, yeah, this is a new thing. And one of the things I've noticed about our industry, we love bright, shiny new things. We don't like things that are 40 years old or 50 years old. Well, where did developing in pairs come from? Now, if we ask Tom Gilb, he says, well, Jim Coplien invented this in 1995. Well, Jim Coplien knows he did not invent this in 1995. Trevor Rainscott, who was the inventor of Model View Controller, I asked him, and he said, oh yeah, I did this in the middle to late 1980s. We had this big Smalltalk project, and we did pair programming. Then I went to Larry Constantine, and he says, yeah, a lot of people say I invented it, but I didn't. I think it was P.J. Plogger, and he was using it in his company called Whitesmiths. They were a compiler company way back in the late 1970s. I also wrote to Ed Jordan, and he also thought it was P.J. Plogger. And he has this wonderful little story that says that the terminals were so expensive that programmers had to learn how to share them, and that was the source of the invention of pair programming. Then I wrote to my friend Jerry Weinberg, and he said, well, I learned to pair program on paper. We didn't even have terminals back in the 1950s. In Los Angeles, from Bernie Dimsdale, who learned it from John von Neumann. I don't know if it has any history before then, but that's way back to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in the 1940s. Ed Jordan then said, oh, it's probably got to go all the way back to Charles Babbage and Lady Lovelace. Yes, I'm sure they were pairing. Brian Kernahan said, I have no recollection of any of the history of pair programming, and I certainly have no involvement with it at all. So Brian's a little bit different here. The point is these great ideas that we think are wonderful and new are not. So here's something which is, over 80 years old, and everyone thinks, oh, it's this new agile thing. We're doing this cool new agile thing called pair programming, and I can put this on my resume and show how smart I am because I'm doing something new. No, novelty doesn't pay the bills. The great practices and great ideas are not new. This is how people have been working together for hundreds and sometimes thousands of years, and we have forgotten this. Patterns are a way for us to go inside of ourselves and discover what it is we know that we have forgotten. So we set about doing research to find these empirically, and then to build a body of literature to share them, and that's what a Scrum book is. So here's a pattern called daily scrum. This is one of the patterns. This is pattern number 29 in the book. So again, the title is in daily cap, in small caps, called daily scrum. And then it starts with a dot, 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 which means this is a continuation of a longer story. There's many other patterns that feed into this one. So we start with the context. Where are we? Well, a Scrum team has been formed, and we're ready to start a sprint. And we have our sprint backlog. Well, is that the plan? Well, we know from, for example, military engagement, that in a complex discipline, no plan of operations extends with any certainty beyond the first contact with the main hostile force. Or the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray, or pick your favorite saying here. We know that this plan is only temporary. Well, okay, then there are three little stars. Let's explore that a little bit. Then we have the forces, or the trade-offs. The goal is to get you to understand the problem, to really relate to something deep within you that can appreciate that this is a difficult problem. So we make progress by finishing sprint backlog items, but the size of the sprint backlog items and the size of the sprint backlog changes minute by minute. We're adding new sprint backlog items, we're taking them off all the time during the sprint. That's what the daily scrum is for, is to replan the sprint. Because of this, we need to consciously replan frequently. But if we replan too much, we're spending all of our time planning and no one knows where we're at. But if we don't replan, then we get off on a blind alley and we end up just, driving off a cliff. Therefore, have a short event every day to replan the sprint, focusing on the next 24 hours and beyond. Time box it so it doesn't rob time from development. A little more solution. In order to plan, you have to know where you are, as well as what problems are standing in the way. So what a daily scrum is the whole team coming together desperately, having a conversation with themselves about how are we going to meet the sprint goal. Not how are we going to finish the sprint backlog. What we're trying to do is achieve the sprint goal. Yeah, if we finish the sprint backlog, that's nice too. And by the way, these three questions are for very, very stupid beginning teams. You don't go through all the impediments and say, here are the impediments that we have. You only talk about impediments if they're going to affect the day's work plan. You only say what you finished yesterday if it adds understanding to what you need to do today. And then you understand, what are we going to do today and how are we going to work around the impediments? So this isn't an agenda with three questions. You don't go around and have everyone answer three questions. You get all the people together and all the people interrupting each other, everybody doing everything, replan the sprint backlog for the next 24 hours. And you're looking at the topics that these three questions address. The three questions are totally optional. Therefore, they're for teams that suck and that are just starting out. Okay? And then we have the resulting context. Now, what is true? What can I assume? All right, so maybe you want to look at the pattern team pride. That's where this is heading. It's also like another pattern called face-to-face before working remotely. So that's a pattern. So these are Scrum patterns. Now you know that patterns are, what is Scrum? Well, y'all know what Scrum is. It's a framework, like all the books say, right? And it's a framework for building a product, right? There's no projects in Scrum, right? We all hate projects. Is for building a product? Well, no. Scrum is a framework for building a process and an organization, and the process and the organization in turn build a product. So if you're going to learn Scrum, what you need to learn is how you build a process. Let's call it a value stream. That's a useful formalism to describe what the process looks like and what its parts are, how things flow from the sprint goal through the product backlog into the sprint backlog and then flow into the market. And how to build an organization, not only your Scrum teams, but your METASCRUM, your Scrum of Scrums, which probably none of you understand, how you interface with management, how you have birds of a feather, all these other parts of the organization. And so what we have done is we have created building blocks for things that you build in order to build a value stream, one chunk at a time. We have building blocks to build the organization, one chunk at a time. And these two wholes, these two things are the things that we build when we're building Scrum. So we have two pattern languages. So here's one of the pattern languages of Scrum. This is the pattern language for building the organization of Scrum. And what you do is you start at the top and you implement that pattern and you keep going down. Once you've implemented a pattern, you can implement any pattern below it in any order that you want. So there's a million ways to go through this graph, all of which will produce a Scrum team, each of which will produce a different Scrum team. And you don't have to visit all the patterns. There's also a pattern language for the value stream. And it starts with the mist up on top and then the product owner's vision. The product owner then builds a value stream, and eventually I'll come down to have a product increment, and so on and so forth. Let me just look at a few of the questions that have come up here. You can vote on these questions. What the role of a project manager in Scrum? There are no project managers in Scrum because there are no projects. If you have a project manager, number one, you do not understand Scrum. Number two, you are never going to be able to do Scrum because you're not focusing on the product, you're focusing on projects. Number three, project managers tend to be very controlling rather than letting the team manage itself. Fourth, they're a manager, project manager. No, projects manage themselves in Scrum. There are no project managers. If you have a project manager, get rid of it. You are not doing Scrum. Okay? Sunil asked a question. Pattern reflects to fix repetitive jobs. No, it isn't a process. It is a structure, and structure is deep. So if I look at the structure of a government, that's fairly stable. I mean, what the legislature deals with every day is different, but the structure is the same. Scrum is the same way. Patterns are about that structure. The sprint goal is not always a single statement. Yes, it is. That's simply wrong. Fix your sprint goal. But I see most of the teams are not even setting up a sprint goal. You suck. Fix it. I don't care what you're seeing. We're here to learn Scrum. And if you want to understand Scrum, this is how Scrum works. 8 people? 8 people is not a team. That's 2 teams. You're working in 8 or 10 different goals? Wow. Now, you have a lot of individual contributors. A sprint goal is there to encourage teamwork. And so if you have 8 or 10 goals, you don't have a team. You have 8 or 10 individuals. What part of team do you not understand? With 3 questions in the daily meeting, it's tough to get a sense of overall progress of the team. You want overall progress of the team? Look at the burn down chart. That's not what the daily Scrum is for. It is not a reporting meeting. It is not a status meeting. Don't you ever say it's a status meeting in front of Jeff Sutherland or he will cut your head off. It is not a status meeting. Of course it's tough to get a sense of overall progress. That's not the purpose of the meeting. Engineering manager, no, we're not going to go there. Again, Scrum teams manage themselves. All right, let's move into some of the patterns. Here's product backlog. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Actually, I had one question on the previous slide. which is about the pattern language. So
Yes.
so when I mean, because you see a list of the patterns which are connected to each other. I mean, in a general sense, what this pattern language is all about. Like, is it like in case you are starting with one pattern, then there is a dependency on other patterns. So how it really works?
Yeah, I mean, dependency is a good, simple way to say it. But as I said, the way you experience that is how you use this. And so you start at the top, you implement the pattern, make sure it works. And once it works, you can go on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And then you follow your way through this graph, and each pattern builds a small part of the value stream. And by the time you get through this, you always have a value stream. And what you're doing is you're refining it. You're making it stronger. You're making it more beautiful. You're making it more refined. You're making it more efficient with each of these patterns. So each one of the patterns is a refinement of the structure of that overall value stream. By adding something to it, by breaking it down, by changing the way you do things. But what these patterns will help you do is to polish up your value stream to make it produce higher value faster with better team engagement. That's what the pattern language is for. And you do this by applying one pattern at a time. Because if you apply two and things get better, you don't know which one made things better. Maybe one of them made things worse and the other one made things better. But the better one won. So one pattern at a time, you go through this graph.
Cool. So one related question
good question.
To the questions which we have in the Slido. Actually, it comes from the perspective of service organizations. These service organizations may be working with different clients, and those clients may not be. I mean, the kind of maturity they may be having in terms of agile, that may be completely different from client to client. So, so in general, the way service companies function is that apart from whatever they work in Scrum, they still have the project management aspect. I mean, in that scenario, actually, I mean, as you mentioned that there are no project managers, but don't we really need the project management in those cases?
No. What happens, you have a customer representative, and if an end user has a problem, they contact that person and say, I have a problem, or I have a suggestion, or I have a question. And if the person knows that, then they answer it. If they don't, they go to the Scrum team. And the Scrum team, if it's a bug, they fix the bug now. Fixing bugs is always highest priority on a Scrum team. So all I need is a help desk. I don't need a project manager. I just need a red telephone with a phone number that an end user can call. You don't need a project manager for that.
But I hope
if you want to call them a project manager because of their salary, you can call them a project manager, but they're not a project manager.
Sure. Actually,
they're not managing anything.
Actually, I mean, one thing I think we had a discussion on the LinkedIn as well. Even though the project management manager are not required, but there is still a value of the project management ideas.
No, they will destroy things. Project managers are there to manage. They are there to control. They manage the team. They tell the team what to do next. That is not Scrum.
Yeah.
Scrum is the development team selecting what it's going to do next.
Sure.
No project managers. And I don't want any Scrum masters who were project managers, because they'll just take the title and they'll continue to do their project management behavior, continuing to manage the team and tell them what to do. Yeah. And they say, oh, I'm a Scrum master. I can tell you what to do. No, the Scrum master may never tell the team what to do or how to do it. Never.
Cool.
So this is why I don't want to see project managers become Scrum masters. It's kiss of death.
Yeah, they come from that mindset that which keeps on continuing actually.
Yeah. All right. let's talk about some patterns. There's product backlog. So a product backlog is an ordered list of product increments. So it's part of the value stream. Things at the bottom of the product backlog are just starting to flow in the value stream, and things at the top of the product backlog are about to flow into the market. So we defined a value stream, and we want the whole team to be coordinated. The product backlog is the authority that we go to ask where we at on product rollout. So for each product, create a single ordered list, not prioritized, called the product backlog. It's a list of product increment contributions called product backlog items, arranged in their expected delivery order, not priority order. Now, every word here means something. It's in delivery order. It's product increment contributions. There's no user stories. There are no user stories in Scrum. I don't ever want to see a user story on your product backlog. A user story is a requirement. And what the product owner does is the product owner will take the user stories from all the users, which define what the users want to see happen. And then the product owner designs a solution, a business solution. So it's the product owner who designs business solutions, not the development team. The product owner owns the product, hence the catchy title. So the product owner designs, first of all, says we need to meet the sprint goal in order to achieve this outcome for the customer. And then they design a product increment to meet that sprint goal. The product increment is a unit of delivery in Scrum. And then we divide up the product increment into product backlog items. Those are units of internal administration. A product backlog item is not a unit of delivery. If you are doing incremental delivery, then you're a feature factory. You're not doing Scrum. You do not have a cogent sprint goal that ties everything together. And this isn't just the ideal. This is the Scrum Guide. This is what the Scrum Guide says. So PBI is not something that you deliver. The product increment is what you deliver. Product backlog items are not deliverables. They're just units of internal administration. And no user stories, either on the product backlog or on the sprint backlog. Aha! Now do you understand how I did this book? Because everyone out there thinks it's a list of user stories and that we're delivering user stories and then I'm delivering many things a sprint. No, you deliver one thing every sprint, which is a product increment that meets the sprint goal. That's Scrum. If you're delivering product backlog items, you're a feature factory. Okay? Birds of a feather. This is an organizational pattern, a very fundamental one. So we not only have Scrum teams, but the question comes up, where do all the Java people get together to decide, when we're going to go to the new Java compiler, or what Java conference we should go to, or where does everyone come together who's interested in learning more about testing? So we maybe have a testing birds of a feather, and we maybe have a Java birds of a feather, which are self-organizing teams that come together for career development. Now, you seem to be asking a lot of questions about managers. If you want managers, put managers in charge of a Java group, a testing group, a quality assurance group, okay? How does a PM take the role in Scrum as you can't move them or remove them? So it's time for you to refactor your CV. Look, Scrum is not just about sucking a little less. When Google hired Wayne Rossing as vice president of engineering in January of 2001, they had all these project managers, and the project managers and the product managers were all telling people what to do. And the product managers would say one thing, the engineering manager would say something else, and the project manager would say something else. So Rossing fired all the managers. This is Google. See how this works? I consulted to a company in Germany and discovered that they had all these problems with management. And, you know, I kicked their ass. I came back four years later. They fired all the managers. This is Bosch IoT. I can send you a YouTube video of it if you like. They made a video about this. Product owners run the company. There's no manager, no managers. Read my lips. So Scrum is probably not what you think it is. It is really a paradigm shift. Okay? The first thing that I tell people in my courses, you have to go home as a Scrum Master and say, we're going to fire all the development managers. Now, you still have managers who run the company. That is, they're going to kill products, define new products, new partnerships, new sources of funding, new markets. But in terms of managing the products, that's the Scrum teams. Okay? What's the difference between a PO and a BA? A lot. A product owner owns the product. Henry Ford was a product owner. Okay? Oh, who's the iPhone guy? Steve Jobs, thank you. Steve Jobs was a product owner. He was product owner. Was he a BA? I don't think so. Product owner means owning the vision. We have a pattern called vision. The product owner has a vision. They own that vision. They own the product. They're not a manager. They manage the product and they manage their vision, but they don't manage people. And they're not a BA. Okay? Birds of a feather. If you look at Japanese companies like Toyota, they have these huge organizations which do exactly this. And they're not part of the company structure. They're employees who do this on their own time outside of work. Swarming. Swarming. I mean, there was this one question here saying, you know, we have 8 or 10 different goals. Well, you're not swarming. You're not a team. You're all individuals. So the problem is that we only get done by working on one thing at a time. If we're working on too many things at once and not working together to help one another, we're not going to get done. Working on too many things at once can radically reduce individual effectiveness. Therefore, focus maximum team effort on one item in the sprint backlog and get it done wherever possible. Now, managers can't control this because the team is controlling it themselves. So they want to understand exactly who to blame for every step of the process. So they hate this. So they do something else instead. And it's called Kanban. And with Kanban, I can divide up the team and perfectly assign exactly who is doing what. So I can get accountability and know who to fire and know who's raised to dock if something goes wrong with the product. That's not Scrum. The whole team works as one mind. So on a Scrum team, you are working on one PBI per team at a time, no more. Everybody is working together on one PBI. And this enables us to have flow through the whole process. Enables us to get things done, enables quality. This pattern is probably the center of Scrum. It may be one of the most important patterns in Scrum. Good housekeeping.
One question on the
go ahead.
swarming is, if you look at it from the actual development team perspective, I'm just trying to think from the implementation perspective. Is it like, and because with this examples, people get a lot more ideas like how it's going to work. So one idea is that the one team is looking at one PBI and then trying to understand how they can contribute in implementing that PBI. So it may be a kind of conversation initially, then depending on how they think, they may be dividing that into subtasks. They start working on those subtasks, they come together again. So I'm just trying to understand, say like, I mean, some ideas or examples of swarming will be helpful from the software development standpoint.
Well, all the discussions take place at sprint planning. I mean, when you finish one PBI, there's no discussion about, okay, how are we going to contribute to this or how are we going to divide it up into tasks? You hit the ground running now. You've had the conversation. That all happened at sprint planning. That's all done. It's on the sprint backlog. It's ready to go. So you come to your daily scrum and say, okay, who wants what task? Who wants to do pair programming on these? Who wants to do pair programming on these? And we need to synchronize with each other. Let's check with each other in a half an hour and see where we're at. And you plan out the day and you adjust the plan during the day. Sure. So all the planning is done way ahead of time. And then you just spend a day and finish that PBI and bring it to done, done, done. Cool. And if people need to swap tasks, if someone is done coding and they need to start testing, great, they start testing. And this is why we have a cross-functional team. So swarming depends on cross-functional team. You can't swarm unless you have a cross-functional team. You have to have a co-located team. You can't swarm with people on different ends of a Zoom connection or a Skype connection. I was once working with Skype. I heard the CEO of Skype say, I was there when he said it, that Skype is not a tool suitable for multi-site software development. This is the CEO of Skype who said this. Co-location, I want the entire team within the length of one school bus. So Rob,
in these days of the COVID situation, people are still working a lot in the remote ways of working. I mean, at least lots of Indian companies are working in that way. And one of the things actually I've seen is that pair programming can be done in distributed mode. It is also very effective. And I have seen that people are also doing mobbing in the virtual environment. How do you see that?
So I see that either you're going to do it to get the same quality, you're going to do it about twice as slow. If you do it at the same speed, the quality will be about half as high. Mm-hmm. You are not getting the nonverbal cues from sitting next to that person. And that's 80% of human communication. All the psychological studies have shown this. And you're missing all of that.
Cool.
So they're starting to come out. I mean, there's lots and lots of papers from the nerds saying, oh, the age of multi-site development is kind of finally here. But if you look carefully, the thoughtful people are saying, oh my gosh, you know, in about 6 months, we're going to realize the price that we paid for not working co-located, and we're going to come back to co-located work. So these are the discussions I pay attention to because they tend to be grounded, well-grounded in the psychological studies, well-grounded in what we are as human beings, well-grounded in how people work together on complex products. So yeah, we do what we can during COVID. We use Skype, we use Zoom, but there's a big price to be paid. And I think that any day a co-located team is going to beat a multi-site team.
Yep.
All right, swarming, good housekeeping, bugs slow you down. Toyota, I mean, Scrum comes from the Toyota production system. And bugs slow you down. The way you get flow is to get rid of bugs. So every night when you go home, you should be able to ship. There should be 0 bugs every night when you go home. It's like cleaning up the shop. Everything is clean and put away. And every night when you go home, in theory, you could deliver. Yesterday's weather, everyone I think knows this, but a lot of people don't do it. How do you know how much you're going to do this sprint? Look at what you did last sprint. This requires a discipline of estimation. This requires fixed length sprints. use your velocity as a way to help you predict what you're going to be able to deliver in the sprint. Enabling specification. At sprint planning, the product owner has to be able to completely help the team understand what they're going to build. There should be 0 unanswered questions at the end of sprint planning. This means that the product owner has to know every error leg, know exactly how many buttons are going to be on the screen, exactly what each of those buttons does, exactly what the error messages are going to say. If the product owner doesn't know that, then the product owner doesn't own the product. So we have a specification that enables the team to do what it does, to come to done, done, done on a PBI. And by the way, it's not something in writing. It certainly isn't something in JIRA. If you're using JIRA, get rid of it. Scrum is not about JIRA. Scrum is about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. This is just basic Scrum, okay? I think I'm going to skip this one. If you have time afterwards and you want to go look this one up, you can find it on the web. This is a very advanced pattern for very high quality teams that absolutely cannot afford to have any quality problems with their release. It essentially means that you make an error box, and so instead of time boxing, you make a bucket that says, well, we can tolerate about this many bugs per sprint because this is about what we have and we know we can clean them up. And you make a bucket for those bugs. If the bucket overflows, abort the sprint. Something is broken. Errors are coming at a much higher rate than they should be, and something is broken in the process. Maybe the specs were bad this sprint. Maybe they have a feature that's causing bugs in other features. I don't know. Stop the sprint, abort the sprint, start over. Dependencies first, same thing. Managing dependencies is difficult. Again, you should do all of this as much as you can at sprint planning. Of course, we have emergent requirements and new dependencies are going to arise. But the rule of thumb is if you have new dependencies arising and you're halfway through the sprint, abort the sprint. You're not going to make it. You should have all your dependencies in hand by halfway through the sprint. If not, abort the sprint, replan, because your plan has some serious flaws if you have unexplored dependencies that are still arising mid-sprint. METASCRUM, which I think is the last pattern, this is the interface between executive management and development. So Scrum teams manage product. Management manages the corporation. They run the business. They pay the electric bills. They make sure the doors are locked at night. They do all the dirty work. Developers and development teams and Scrum teams build the product, but you need management, and maybe there's an interface between them and management does have a say. You have a weekly meeting, usually on Wednesday afternoon, between management and the product owners. This is their one chance to try to influence product, and you have an agreement beforehand that the product owners still have authority over the product. No project managers, no line managers, no vice presidents, only product owners can define what's in the product, and they have the final say. But this is where they listen to management. Once a week, the METASCRUM, running the whole company as a Scrum. So that's a quick tour through a few of the patterns. If you want to learn more, you can get the book. You can get it on Amazon. There's an old copy online at scrumbook.org. You can find announcements of events on our Facebook page, and for events like this and webinars and courses and things, you can find these on my webpage. Shrikant and I talked. I propose that maybe sometime in the near future we should have a full one-day course on Scrum Patterns targeted at this audience, targeted at the Indian market. And today's talk just is kind of to get you grounded and get you pointed in the direction about what patterns are, and to show you that they really are valuable. We do have a crisis in Scrum, a knowledge crisis, and people really don't understand how it works. And that these patterns are a way of coming back and getting underneath people's understanding and enabling them to make the right kind of judgments themselves. A good pattern isn't just an instruction that says do X, Y, and Z. It touches something deep within yourself that will cause you to make the right decision and do the right thing. So these are not something to be followed blindly, but they're more an inspiration for you rolling out Scrum incrementally in your environment than they are a roadmap or a definitive plan that's going to help people follow exactly the right steps. So there's a few more questions here. Shrikant, should I continue just to go down the list of questions for now?
Yes, I think that will be fine.
So how can swarming be done effectively in a non-face-to-face world? Not very effectively. Fix it. Do I have to accept the changes from the client in the middle of the sprint and accommodate the change in the same sprint? Or should I push for it for upcoming sprints? You can do either one. Survival and customer happiness are optional. If project management doesn't have future, then why are organizations like Google launching project management certification? I don't know anything about Google's project management certification, so I don't know. Simply don't know. Isha, can you say more about the project management certification? Maybe not.
Sorry, I was on mute. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, so as part of Google digitalization online certification program, they're going to launch project management certification, which is yet to be launched, but they have announced it.
I mean, it may be for some of their non-software products. I mean, you know that they're building, for example, an automobile. Within 2 years, you're going to see Google cars on the streets. You know they're building kites with big propellers to generate electrical energy. You know they're working with wave energy. You know, Google is a lot more than just software. So, I mean, I have not heard about any of this in the software domain. My guess would be that it's in one of these other domains. Something that's not as complex. But project management can work if what you're doing is fixed cost things for specific customers. It's almost a service. And if they can have a service business within one of those new sectors, then it kind of makes sense. But it doesn't make sense for Scrum, because Scrum isn't about projects, it's about products. And Google more or less runs Scrum. I mean, they have their own internal Scrum trainer. A lot of the shape of the products, it's all very product focused. They do have people with the title of manager, but if you look at their job description, it's a Scrum Master. I mean, almost exactly. You know, look, if you want to Google this, look at Project Oxygen on the web. What was the standards to which they hold their managers, and it's basically a Scrum Master. So there's, it's not a project management culture. And I haven't heard anything about this.
Actually, there is a question which is floating around in a lot of circles, even on LinkedIn actually, which is about Scrum Master needing to have the product knowledge or the domain understanding. Is that required or not required? So what is your thought process?
This is an excellent question, and it's a two-edged sword, because if the Scrum Master does have product knowledge, they can have empathy with the developer and the product owner and the customer. And they can maybe know who the go-to person is better in order to solve a problem. The downside of this is that they're more likely to interfere in the team, to insert their knowledge. And the Scrum Master may not do that. By the same token, I don't want to see someone who is both a developer and a Scrum Master. If you're a Scrum Master, you do no development, because otherwise you're going to influence the team's development decisions. So it can work both ways. If a Scrum Master has product knowledge and has the discipline to not use it to direct the team, but just use it for empathy and understanding where to go to get the solution to a problem, then that's great. But it can be a big liability. So I think it's a relatively minor issue.
Actually, what I've seen is that when the Scrum Master doesn't really understand domain or what people are really doing, then sometimes he is not able to sense the kind of problems team may be having, and then by the time he realizes that it may be too late for the team perspective.
Give a specific example.
Yeah, example is like, I mean, people are having daily Scrum, and when they are talking about certain things, then the Scrum Master is not really able to get into like what they are actually doing. And sometimes when I've seen that people really understand the domain and what product we are trying to build, then they are able to sense that there is some problem and there may be a kind of impediment which can require some corrective action at the right time instead of
great example. Great example. The Scrum Master owns the process. The product owner owns the product. So let's say that, and this is a little bit controversial, but let's say it was really clear. The product owner made it very clear at sprint planning that the color of this button should be red, right? And the Scrum Master sees during production, he just happens to look at the screen and sees that the button is green. What should the Scrum Master do? I mean, the Scrum Master was there. The Scrum Master was there on sprint planning. He very clearly heard the product owner say this button should be red. And he sees a team implementing it in green. What should the Scrum Master do? And the answer is, let it fail. Because if the Scrum Master comes in and fixes it, then the Scrum Master is putting themselves in a product authority position. They are not the product authority. They are the process authority. Now, there's something wrong in the process if the team was not able to understand that this button should be red. Woo! That's information. Let's talk about it at sprint retrospective. So why did you make this? Look, I mean, a sprint review, we're going to find out they made it the wrong color. Okay? Oh, well, then we can talk about it in sprint retrospective and say, what is wrong with the process that caused the team to do this wrong? And now we'll fix the process, and that is the Scrum Master's responsibility. If the Scrum Master comes in and says, no, that button should be green, you'll never fix the process because the Scrum Master has made a product judgment because they have domain knowledge. This is why I say that domain knowledge can be a very serious liability because they end up telling the team what to do instead of doing their job.
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, the other part of this, and this is very difficult, and it's probably especially in Indian culture to understand, let it fail. And people hate to fail. And the Scrum Master does not want to see it fail because they're afraid they may be blamed. No, the Scrum Master should let it fail. Scrum is all about controlled failure. You will fail 50% of your sprints. If the team doesn't understand, we're not going to fix it halfway through the sprint. We're going to let it fail and fix the process. This goes very deep into Scrum's foundations in the Toyota production system. I want to get the feedback from an event that shows we have a failure. And in fact, the Japanese even have a word for it. They call it hansei, which in polite conversation is translated reflection. But what really means repentance, regret, shame, harikari. Hansei. In the Toyota manual, it says there is no Kaizen without Hansei. So I want the team regularly failing and learning from it. You celebrate failures. You don't try to hide them.
But when you say that, I mean, reflection in terms of shame and all that stuff, is it, I mean, it doesn't look like a kind of celebration, isn't it? Or celebrating the failures.
If your child gets a low grade in school, and then you sit down with your child and help them develop study habits, and now their grade comes up.
Yeah.
How do you feel? You feel good.
Yeah.
I want you to celebrate that low grade, because that low grade is an opportunity for you to intervene as a parent and to help them become a wonderful, informed, learning, mature human being. If you're going to look at that low grade in a negative sense, you're sending negative signals to your child, and they are going to want to avoid that at any cost. The parent's intent is they're going to avoid this by studying, but most children will do, except there's a very few that are not like this. What most children will do is try to hide it, or they will go into cheating rather than getting Kaizen mind.
Absolutely.
There are a few children who can figure out the game. There's a book about them by June Singer called The Drama of the Gifted Child. There's a whole bunch of child psychology literature on this. What you want to do is celebrate that failure and say, okay, son, daughter, you got a D here. That's really interesting. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about how you can make that better so you really shine.
Now, actually, I got what you mentioned about the hindsight and the connection with the Kaizen, actually. So there has to be hindsight and then followed by Kaizen, isn't it?
Yep.
Cool.
Scrum at scale and safe, the usual questions. Scrum at scale basically doesn't work. I gave a talk on this at the Scrum gathering in Vienna about, it was last fall. And Scrum at scale basically doesn't work. I mean, it cannot be agile because the communication lines are too long between individuals. If I have a development organization of 625 people, the average length of the communication link between developers is 7.5. Now, if I just pick a random person on this Zoom call, and we look at how many social hops there are between me and you, it is almost always less than 8. This is true for any two people in the world. This is called small world theory. Scrum at scale can almost do that good for an organization of 625 people, what small world theory can do for a population of 8 billion people. Scrum at scale just simply doesn't work. I gave this talk. It created a lot of noise. Jeff Sutherland rewrote the Scrum at Scale guide, and now this is all, there's been a lot of things happening. I don't know, Shrikant, if I've been keeping you up to date. but actually the Scrum Alliance has sued Scrum Inc. in court
Yes.
because they were taking money that Scrum Alliance had given to Scrum Inc. to build Scrum at Scale. And the claim from the Scrum Alliance is that Scrum Inc. was taking this money and putting it into Scrum at Scale, into their own certification program for Scrum Masters instead of putting it into Scrum at Scale. 2 days ago, a judge in the Texas Eastern District of the United States Federal District Court issued a temporary restraining order barring Scrum Incorporated from further use of terms licensed Scrum Trainer, licensed Scrum Master, and other associated terms.
Yep.
And the case will continue. So, oh, by the way, in the middle of this case, Scrum Incorporated tried to dissolve Scrum at Scale.
Oh.
And then the Scrum Alliance, which has a $3 million investment in, has said, no, you can't do that. And the judge slapped the hands of Scrum Inc. and said, so, I mean, Scrum Inc. tried to kill Scrum at Scale. And then the judge said, no, you can't do that because the Scrum Alliance has a $3 million investment in it. So SAFe is just silly. I mean, anyone who knows anything about Scrum and anything about SAFe, all you need to do is take a quick look at SAFe. There's nothing agile about SAFe. It's in a completely different world. It's essentially the rational unified process from 20 or 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But
yep.
I mean, if you're going to be looking at scaling issues, the thing I think to look at is less. I have some problems with less too, but less is actually about descaling, not about scaling. And I think they have things right. Scrum at Scale does not.
That is the reason people find it difficult to implement as well.
Yeah, I mean, SAFe is probably very big in India because you have so much hierarchy in the culture and managers have power. And managers don't want to lose their job, especially those project managers that told you we were going to fire. And so they bring in SAFe because then they can have a position in the hierarchy, right? They still have a job.
Actually, it's not only about India, but it's a global phenomenon where people don't want to lose their hierarchy. So most of the, centers in India are from the companies outside. So they continue to maintain that hierarchy because it looks like to them they can continue with the way they were working before and just need to add some bits of it using SAFe.
Yeah. Excellent question. What's the difference between product manager and product owner? So a product manager manages the product day to day, supports the team, gets them resources, tells them what direction to go. So like I say, Henry Ford was the product owner for the Model T. Okay? For the Jeff Bezos is the product owner for his spaceship. Who's the Tesla guy? I mean, he's the product owner for the shuttle that's currently delivering things to the
Elon Musk.
So these right. These guys are product owners. Now there may be some product managers in the organization that are hand-holding the team every day, but the product owner has, number one, they have the vision. Number two, they define the business. They're accountable for value. So if the product doesn't get value, you fire the product owner. They're accountable for value. So they can control the content of the product backlog and the order of delivery of the product backlog. And because they have control, we're going to hold them accountable for results. Product managers really, well, accountability varies. But it's this notion of owning the product. This is my product. This is my baby. This is my passion. I'm going to do great things in the world with this product. Whereas, so a product owner isn't someone you hire. A product owner is someone who invents it. A product manager is someone who you hire. They're a mercenary. You bring them in to manage the product.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
We're talking about failures, but we expect predictability at the same time. No problem. This requires an understanding of complex adaptive processes. And again, the way you manage this is by reducing variance. So of course you're going to have failures. And as I showed with sprints, even though you reduce your variance from 20% to 10%, you're still going to fail 50% of the time. It's just that the magnitude of the failure is much smaller. And we do that by managing variance. So this is one of the key features of the Toyota production system. It was put there by a guy named W. Edwards Deming, who had given up on Detroit and decided to help Japan after World War II. And he kind of drilled into them this concept of statistical process control. So this is exactly how you get failure and predictability to go hand in hand. There is no fundamental conflict. And this is really fundamental to how Scrum works. How about the Spotify model of Agile? There is no Spotify model. Would people please, please, please stop saying Spotify model? There is no Spotify model. I've talked to Henrik Nieberg about this. He will tell you there is no Spotify model. If you want to know the Spotify model is try something. If it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, stop doing it. There, that's the Spotify model. There is no other model. And managers and consultants keep telling you, oh, we're going to talk about guilds and all these fancy terms that have to, and no, that's not the Spotify model. They don't even have guilds anymore. They're phasing them out of all their new teams. And all these consultants are going around talking about guilds. They're not even there.
What about chapters? I mean, I was just curious about what is the kind of current state of Spotify. Are they still using the chapters, guilds, and all that stuff which they started with?
You want an answer that's true today or true tomorrow? It'll change. No. The point, that's my point, is that the Spotify model is not about guilds and chapters. The Spotify model is about how will we move from guilds and chapters to the thing that's even better. Yep. That's the Spotify model.
Yep.
So if you're asking questions about guilds and chapters, you're asking the wrong questions. No, you do not understand it at the right level of depth.
I was just saying that, I was just trying to basically support the idea which you just mentioned, is that it is a continuous improvement kind of stuff. So whatever they had something in 2012 doesn't exist anymore. They may be doing something else altogether.
Exactly right. Now it's on my list. I've been watching some of Henrik Nieberg's videos, and he has a few things wrong. They're minor things, but I'm going to send him a mail and say, you know, Henrik, you got this wrong. And it's particularly about flow, single piece continuous flow, teams, swarming, and so forth. He doesn't have that quite figured out, in my opinion. So I'm going to open up some dialogue with it. And he's a very, very smart and a wonderful, warm guy. He's a wonderful guy to have dialogue with and to work with.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to having that conversation with him.
I think with that, I think we are we come to the end of this webinar. Most of the questions have been answered, and I just want to say that this has been a wonderful conversation. At the same time, as James just mentioned, that we may want to have a workshop soon for the Indian audience as well, which has never happened so far. So I'll be working with James on that.
Well, thank you everyone for showing up. Wow, what a crowd. We had 100 people on here, and I think that's because there's a Zoom limit of 100.
Yes.
I think Zoom cuts it off 100.
There were people struggling to get into here.
All right, somebody said an eye opener. Great. It's me here who said that. Great. I wanted to get people a little bit shocked about what they think they know. And hopefully we can take some next steps so we can talk about going ahead with some kind of webinar in the future.
Cool.
Shrikant, thanks for setting this up. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you everyone for showing up. And I hope to see you all sometime in the near future.
Cool. Actually, we definitely want to see you again because I think when was your last visit to India?
Oh, it was to Bangalore. When was that? It was back in the wow, that's been a long time. Probably 10, 12 years. Been a long time ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that it will be an opportunity to have a workshop with you soon, actually.
Yeah, well now we can do it with Zoom. That'll be cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All righty, Shrikant, we'll see you on LinkedIn and in the mails.
Sure. Thank you.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
See you.
Thanks, James and Shrikant.
Thanks, James.